What if everything you thought you knew about Jenova in Final Fantasy VII was wrong? In this video, we're going to dive into a dangerous theory. What if Yunalesca becomes Jenova many years after the events of Final Fantasy X and prior to the events of Final Fantasy VII? We will explore Final Fantasy X and how Yunalesca's defeat in Zanarkand leads her down a road where, like the Unsent Seymour, she gains extraordinary power. We will consider how Omega became a powerful fiend, and how Yunalesca's own Unsent form had already begun shifting into a fiend-like monster. We will look at Final Fantasy X-2's Den of Woe, and see what happens when the unchecked rage of the Unsent gets out of control. And of course, we will consider how the heck she ended up on Final Fantasy VII's Gaia, being called Jenova so many years later. Part 1. Who is Yunalesca? Before we discuss whether Yunalesca is Jenova, it's imperative that we first think about who Yunalesca is to begin with. Before her death, Yunalesca was a high-ranking summoner in the city-state of Zanarkand, which was ruled by her father, Yu Yevon, 1,000 years prior to the beginning of Final Fantasy X. In the Final Fantasy X 2.5 Aion no Daisho novella, we get a closer look at the societies of Bevelle and Zanarkand during the Machina Wars. Through the point of view of Unsent soldiers, we see the events of a proxy war of sorts between the two powerful city-states, all the way off on some remote island near Besaid. The war, which was portrayed in the games as being between the Machina-dominant Bevelle versus the magic-dominant Zanarkand, is eventually won by Bevelle. However, it's Zanarkand's cult of summoner worship that ends up taking hold in the years following the war. Yunalesca's father is looked up to by his people as a benevolent and most powerful leader, Yu Yevon, the mage of Zanarkand. Yunalesca had no small part in this nation-state cult of personality, also being revered as the summoner princess, unparalleled in her beauty. It is only from the perspective of the soldiers of Bevelle where it's revealed that the two powerful summoners are seen by the other side as being heretics who have cast away the many gods of the old pantheon. Now, I just want to make an aside really briefly here that it's really interesting how we don't really get any information in the games about any pantheon from the old times. That section of history seems so completely scrubbed by Yevon that it isn't even mentioned at all. It has to leave me wondering if maybe there could have been secret libraries full of the banned histories, counterintuitive to Yevon's teachings. Maybe rival societies, like that of the Guado, might have had counterbalancing points of view, given that they shared different teachings about the histories of Spira before joining Yevon. Anywho, back to the topic at hand. Yunalesca! When the whole war thing went to crap for Zanarkand on the eve of their destruction, Yunalesca and her husband Zayn fled the city, and instead of being overwhelmed by Bevelle Machina, Yu Yevon created a powerful living and magical armor, which we all know as Sin. This armor enveloped him, protecting him in a powerful gravity magic that pulled in millions of fireflies. And we know what happens when you get surrounded by tons of highly dense fireflies. You go crazy, like the people who stumbled across the Den of Woe, or those who were affected by Sin's toxin. So, Yu Yevon lost his marbles and became this tick-like bug at the center of the Sin armor. On the outside, Sin destroyed the unwitting Bevelle army at the doorsteps of Zanarkand, and also destroyed Zanarkand along with it. The remaining survivors of Zanarkand were so loyal to Yu Yevon at this point in time that they sacrificed themselves to become Faith atop Mount Gegazet and summon an undying dream of Zanarkand at the height of all its glory. From here on out, it would be Sin's prerogative to protect that dream by keeping any society that became too powerful in check. Highly developed machina and large population centers capable of perhaps reaching the dream would be Sin's targets for the next 1,000 years. As Spira tried to find a new foothold in this brave new world, Yunalesca had her husband and guardian Zayn become a special kind of faith attached to an Aeon capable of defeating Sin. The Zayn final summon killed Sin, but of course, Sin as we know it was designed to use concentrations of fireflies to maintain itself. And so, it used the fireflies from Zaon's Aeon form to fuel it from there on, effectively making Zaon the new Sin. It's not really clear what Yunalesca and Zaon's motives were in this time, but one thing I'm sure of is, it probably had to do with her father's grand plan somehow, which she no doubt was also privy to. Maybe this was just their plan to be part of Yu Yevon's revenge. Who knows? But what we do know is that when the Yevonite clergy finally made it back to Zanarkand and discovered the Unsent Yunalesca, she revealed how she defeated Sin, and this became an essential part of the Yevonite doctrine. Almost by coincidence, in fact wholly by coincidence, Yunalesca's former enemies in Bavel would continue on the legacy of her father's cult, and in so doing, find themselves matching her own machinations for what Spira should be. Before I move on to the next part of the discussion, I want to quickly raise AI voice accusations made in the comments on previous videos like this one. I don't use AI voice, and I'm inserting this video clip to prove it. It's kind of annoying when I feel like I need to respond to these multiple posts that are so confidently, yet so completely wrong about the same thing. So here I am, just nipping it in the bud. But also, it puts Final Fantasy fandom in a bad light, since I can literally make a video on anything else and never get these sorts of accusations. You hate yourself. I get it. You hate your voice and can't contribute anything of value to a discussion because you're just a forgettable NPC. I'm here for you, buddy, and I'm not AI. Anyway, thanks for your time. Okay, moving on. Part 2. Jenova. One of the key features of Jenova that reappears across all of Final Fantasy VII media and releases is the power of reunion. What is the reunion? Well, at first, we're led to believe it's just all of these people who were experimented on with Jenova cells getting back together to get their revenge. Later on, however, it's revealed that when separated, Jenova's body parts exert a force or will to come back together. Hojo, the lead experimenter on the Jenova project, thought that if he injected people with Jenova's cells, that the cells would manipulate people by showing them paranoid delusions and hallucinations, as well as infusing them with terrible power, with the ultimate goal of rejoining her cells as one in the reunion. We see this play out to varying degrees, as Sephiroth kills experimental soldiers who are undergoing the effects of reunion, but we see it even more intimately toward the final act of the movie, Final Fantasy VII, Advent Children, where Kadaj, once merging with Jenova's head, becomes Sephiroth, complete with all of Sephiroth's memories and desires. This will be a very useful point to remember later on in this argument. So, covering reunion, the next most important thing about Jenova, in fact, some people might even say this is the real most important part about Jenova, is that she's a sort of alien parasite that traveled to Gaia on a meteor with the goal of feeding off of Gaia's lifestream, both destroying it and becoming it at the same time. Ultimately, she tried to realize these goals by manipulating Sephiroth into summoning a meteor to inflict a massive wound on the planet, which he would then feed off of and use before heading off to the next planet in need of destroying. Now, you might say, yeah, that seems like a more important detail than the reunion thing, but I'd argue it's only possible for her to achieve these goals through her ability to manipulate people through reunion. Although, I guess you could make the counter-argument that she found some way to nearly destroy the world a long time ago, before the ancients were able to defeat her, and that likely predates the whole reunion thing. So whatever, I'd concede that point if you want to make it, but we'd essentially just be splitting hairs over minute details at that point, ultimately agreeing about her purpose and abilities. So, I hear you saying, how did this bring us to Yunalesca's Jenova, big dog? I'm getting to that. Part 3. The Unsent. In Final Fantasy X, we battled Seymour, and then before sending him, he was able to escape only to leave us to fight him, yet again, in Bavel. But this time, he was a dead boy. That's right, he became Unsent. And even worse, his power multiplied by feeding on the souls of the dead. And as if we hadn't learned our lesson the first time, after defeating him in Bavel, we left him Unsent again, encountering him one more time on Mount Gagazet, but not before he wiped out a large swath of the Ronso tribe and absorbed their souls as well. That's right, Seymour Flux is a hungry airship thing. Anyway, not without pain, we defeated Seymour again, and didn't send him for some reason, only to later on fight him one more time, after he absorbed even more souls and ended up inside Sin somehow. So, my question is, if Yunalesca is unsent, and she was already showing signs of changing her form similar to the many different forms of Seymour, and similarly to Seymour, we didn't bother sending her after defeating her, then wouldn't it be kind of naive to think she wasn't still kicking around? Not only that, we completely altered the status quo, which was the sole reason she seemed to remain on Spira over, fulfilling the legacy of her father. A terrible legacy which she saw completely eye to eye on with him. And of course, I would be remiss to go through all of this explanation without raising the story of Omega. Omega was a monk of Yevon who in his heresy ended up turning away from the teachings of all the nerve. Well, in his defense, this was also during a time that hadn't seen another final summoning after hundreds of years of being punished by Sin. Okay, maybe he had a reason for being suspicious, I guess. Anyway, he was banished to the Omega Ruins after a failed uprising where he died, and end of story. Right? Wrong. He became an Unsent, of course, and over time his hatred turned inward, reshaping his body as a terrible fiend of immeasurable power. Maybe you already see where I'm going with this. If not, let me spell it out for you. When we battled Yunalesca, she changed forms a few times, eventually revealing her final form as a monstrous serpentine head, with her original body being like a soulless vestigial appendage strapped to her grotesque form. I'd argue this isn't just to convey that Yunalesca had the power to transform. It's that this was her true form after a millennium of living in the Zanarkand dome as an unsent shadow of her former self. So, we already know that Yunalesca's unsent, that the unsent become powerful fiends like Omega if they're allowed to stick around on Spira for too long, and furthermore, that we didn't send her after defeating her. This begs the question of what she got up to after the fall of Yevon. Part 4. Where did she go? If you're asking where Yunalesca went, let me spell it out for you. The Farplane. Okay, video's over. We can all go home, right? Well, sure. If you don't want to know the rest, which I'm sure you do if you got this far, right? Also, if you got this far, you might already be wondering why I'm so invested in this idea that FF10 and FF7 are connected this way. I do have a video going into deeper detail about that, but I do just want to reiterate a point that may be glossed over after a few thousand words. This is fiction, and a sort of literary analysis at that. We can take canonism as the gospel of creative intention all we want, and to a certain degree, I think I do this as well, but at the end of the day, it's kind of weird to go on about what we believe being true or false about this made-up world. It's kinda like arguing about different interpretations of the Bible. Actually, it's exactly like that, except instead of arguing about some dead guy 2,000 years ago, we're arguing about the intentions of a character who we know is made up. So that being said, let's try to keep it civil, right? Dang, 2 appeals to reason in one video. I must be so triggered and dreading those edgelord comments. Anyway, Yunalesca went to the Farplane. My logic here is that the Unsent who stick around on Spira always seem to become totally obsessed over fulfilling their purpose. We saw it with Orin, we saw it again with Seymour, we saw it with Micah, we saw it with Shuyan. It would be naive to think we wouldn't see Yunalesca try to exert her will in seeing her purpose fulfilled if she was inconveniently thwarted for a time. So, in the case of all the Unsent we've talked about so far, they usually use any number of means to achieve their ends. Orin and Micah were able to see their purposes enacted by moving other people around like pawns, so to speak. Orin leads the unwitting party to Yunalesca, where she would reveal the same thing she revealed to him 10 years earlier, except this time, none of them had kids to worry about, so they're all like, heck no, I ain't sacrificing my friends. And when it comes down to it, I think that's what sets Braska and Jack apart from Yuna and co. Braska and Jack, above all else, wanted their kids to be safe. As for Micah, we know in a more intimately manipulative way how he pushed around the masses of Spira in order to continue the teachings of Yevon. And this just goes to show how not every Unsent will try to see their will done by becoming powerful fiends. However, becoming powerful fiends does have its uses for things like revenge, or scaring people into doing what you want them to do, or, well, just plain taking joy in killing, like Seymour. So after the events of FF10, Yunalesca kinda drops off the radar. I mean, sure, she is sort of in Via Infinito as the fiend Chalk, but that's not really completely her, just a shard of her memory, taken from a sphere recovered by Yu Yevon that was eventually locked in Via Infinito. Yet, even still, that small shard of her being became a powerful fiend. So imagine how powerful the bulk of herself would become if, like Seymour and Omega, she were left to stew and absorb more souls into her very being. Part 5. Sailing the Cosmos.
What I want, Cloud, is to sail the darkness of the cosmos with this planet as my vessel. Just as my mother did long ago.
So remember that point in the video when I talked about Kadaj merging with Jenova's head to become Sephiroth? Well, this shows that the memories and will of the people that become part of the Jenova sphere, if you will, have a shared memory between them. Sephiroth must have essentially been stored between Kadaj and the head, or if you want to take it a step further, he might have been dispersed between all of Jenova's parts, including the cells. I'd argue that this mirrors the powerful sense of will that the Unsent from FF10's Spira exert on the world, and no will was exerted more forcefully than Yu Yevon's in the form of sin, except for maybe Yunalesca's will, which I would also argue is almost an extension of Yu Yevon's will, since they seem to share the same goals. When her father's dream was destroyed, or rather dream Zanarkand, the dream of the faith, and the very thing which she and her father conspired to protect via sin, all that was left was destruction, and the embodied will of that destructive force was sin. So, she went into the Farplane to soak up all the lost souls of Spira, eventually soaking up the entire Farplane. With all of those souls in the form of fireflies, she was able to become a destructive force not unlike sin, although not entirely the same. Her new form would become a crazed fiend bent on revenge and destruction, while mirroring the powers of her father's armor to put its pieces back together, and feed off of the Farplane and the fireflies of the final Aeon in order to rebuild itself whenever it was defeated. Sin spawn, when separated, return to the host body, or in the cases where they're deliberately kept apart, sin will return for them, not unlike the reunion. See, it's all coming full circle. On Gaia, Yunalesca would find the descendants of the heretics who fled Spira, and her purpose there would be to destroy them, feeding off of Mako and the Lifestream, similarly to how she fed off of the Farplane and Fireflies. One of the points of contention that some people who hate this theory have raised is the difference in how fiends appear on Gaia versus Spira. On Spira, they're unsent who devolve into fiends, while on Gaia, they're experiments by Shinra. Well, it's not exactly as straight as that. Some of the fiends on Gaia are creatures experimented on by Shinra, but it's also true that some are just naturally occurring creatures that have been tainted by Mako energy. And what is Mako energy? FF7's equivalent to fireflies. And just for the record, it isn't just me who says that. It's the Final Fantasy Ultimania. FF7's Mako, FF9's Mist, FF10's Fireflies. These are kind of different versions of the same phenomena, creating a sort of shared magical physics between the different worlds, and that's essentially how it's described by Square Enix. So, while the direct method may not be entirely the same, the involvement of Mako versus the involvement of Fireflies draws a lot of similarities. But also, that's not even really a counterpoint to the differences between Yunalesca and Jenova. It's just pointing out differences between FF7 and FF10, which, yes, they are different games, so there will be differences. But ignoring the similarities while only pointing out the differences is kind of just cherry-picking. The devil's advocate will say, "Aren't you cherry-picking?" Maybe I am, but I am also at least drawing on the thoughts of the developers. Now, I hear what you're saying. That's a big jump to make, and although there are parallels, and you've listed a lot of build-up, that is true. I just can't get over the leap you have to make to get from Spirit to Gaia. Well, if you want to know more about that leap, go check out my video on the topic of FF10 being a precursor to the events of FF7. But at the end of the day, you don't have to accept it if you don't want to. It's just a theory after all. Nah, don't worry, I'm not going to say the next part of that. And that, my friends, is where I will leave this line of reasoning. If you're not already on the way to my other video, here's some similar videos popping up on screen right now. Don't forget to subscribe if you made it this far, because I know if you made it this far, there's other videos you'd like to watch on this channel. In any case, have fun and stay safe, and I'll see ya in the next video. Bye-bye!